Hey everyone, and welcome to another GameXplain discussion. I'm your host, Derek Bittner, and I'm joined today by Ash Paulson and John Cartwright to discuss the recent Wall Street Journal report that Nintendo is releasing both a handheld and pro version of the Switch in 2019. So, let's get started. Alright, so we've talked about this subject before back in January when Nikkei basically had a similar report that Nintendo's working on a new version of the Switch for release sometime between May of 2019 and I think March of 2020. And the Wall Street Journal post that just went out seems to narrow that down quite a bit. So, John, you actually covered this update. Tell us about this whole report that Wall Street Journal put out.
So it actually goes back even before Nikkei as well, because back in 2018, Wall Street Journal told us that a revision was coming in 2019. So I guess this is kind of the follow-up to last year's report on it. And this time they're a bit more specific. So basically, there are two consoles coming this year. One of them is aimed at the pro consumer, and the other one's aimed at the more like casual, low-end consumer. And they're also coming in this year in summer. They specify it could be announced during E3, but that's kind of just speculation on their part. But I did a bit of digging into other revisions in the past, and Nintendo tend to give like 1 or 2 months notice before putting them on store shelves. So, the 3DS XL was announced in June, and released in July in Europe and Japan. The new 3DS was announced in August, I believe, and released in October in Japan. So that's what they do generally, because I guess when you announce a successor to what you currently have, you don't want to scare off anyone who's going to be buying your system, so you don't give them that much notice before putting it on sale. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's generally the gist. There's basically going to be a big Pro system and a small, probably handheld-only system. And we have one more detail though, which is the smaller system will not have Rumble, which is kind of interesting, because games like Mario Odyssey have moons that depend on Rumble. So I don't quite know how that's going to work, but yeah, that's the gist of what these systems will be. One's bigger, one's smaller.
What do you think about that, Ash? Because you weren't around for our first discussion, so what do you think about these revisions in general?
Well, I think the one other interesting detail to mention here is, or at least that the Wall Street Journal report says, is that that we would be wrong to think that these revisions are going to be like the PS4 Pro or Xbox One X in the sense that they look the same as the current model. That apparently they're going to be quite different, which that's kind of what throws me off, because the Switch is what it is because it has the Joy-Con, because it has, that you can play it handheld or you can connect it to a TV. So those two elements to me have to stay in whatever, at least in the Switch Pro model, I would think they would have to stay, intact. So it's hard to wonder what major changes they could make. Other than one thing I hope they do is improve the kickstand, because the one that's on there now is just absolute trash. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this isn't surprising, and I do think they'll be announced at E3, because that would, as you said, John, with the narrow time window they usually give between announcement and release, that would put these coming out in midsummer, which seems to line up with what this report is saying. So makes sense to me. Nintendo's well known for their hardware revisions mid-hardware cycle. It's a little strange to me to think that we're already maybe halfway through the Switch's hardware cycle, because it feels like it still just came out. But I am looking forward to seeing whatever it is they're going to add to the deluxe model, and I'm sure I'm going to pick one up. Whatever they do, I'm sure I'm going to have one.
Yeah, it still strikes me as odd, just that they're coming out with these so soon. The handheld model makes perfect sense to me. That's like, get it out cheaper, get it for kids, especially with Animal Crossing and Pokemon coming this year. You want that out to as many people as possible and to have as few barriers of entries as you can. That makes complete sense to me. A pro version this soon? That's a little weird. For example, we had the original DS. Not a great look, not really, not the best. But when we got DS Lite, it needed those updates. And that's the thing. I don't really see a lot that the Switch needs in order to update. I think that's where I'm at. Is I don't think a pro version, to have both a pro version and a handheld version come out at the same time, I don't know, that feels like it's eating itself.
Yeah, I guess we have PlayStation 5 and Xbox 2 on the horizon, and I suppose Nintendo need to compete in some way, but Nintendo never really compete in power. They always compete in doing interesting things to their systems and making up for that with hardware gimmicks rather than actually competing with power. But I do guess maybe if they do a revision with a more powerful Switch, maybe they would have 4K output, but that's probably, even then, that's maybe too much for what the system is, because it's basically a mobile chip. And whether we can even render like games like Breath of the Wild in 4K, I'm rather doubtful on.
Yeah, I feel like hoping for 4K is probably a little bit aggressive too. And the report does specify that, like, this is not going to be as powerful as, the PS4 and Xbox One necessarily, so don't expect a huge jump in power. But it is kind of hard to wonder how much more power the Switch needs, because already, the best-looking Switch games look fantastic, in my opinion, and even the ones that are below that, the Switch handles them just fine. And I mean, yes, there are Switch games that obviously look way worse than their multi-platform counterparts, but I don't see how much more power the Switch really needs. But perhaps, maybe if Nintendo sees streaming in their future, maybe one of the changes they might make under the hood is to improve the communications features on the Switch and just make sure, maybe future-proof it for possible streaming down the line, since that seems to be where a lot of things are going.
Like, give it an Ethernet port built in as well, because that's something that's always so tricky to do with the Switch unless you have like a USB dongle. But I also think an interesting part of the cheaper machine is they specify no rumble, which to me says no Joy-Con, because obviously Joy-Con have rumble. So are we expecting something like a traditional handheld where the controllers are just built into the unit? Because if so, that makes a few games like Super Mario Party incompatible, unless I guess you buy like separate Joy-Con to play the game with.
You actually got me thinking about that when you reminded us that Super Mario Odyssey has a few moons that require rumble. I had forgotten about that, so I do wonder if there will just be straight incompatibility with certain games, but there is no way Nintendo would release a budget version of the Switch aimed at kids and not have it compatible with Mario Odyssey. That's just impossible. I don't see a scenario in which that happens.
I suppose you can patch games that rely on rumble with, I don't know, like some kind of visual feedback, but that might be too much of a workaround just for that very specific feature, though.
Yeah, I don't quite get it myself. Yeah. It's just sort of there, and I in one hand, it makes sense. There's, keep costs down, get rid of the HD rumble, and it's we're treating this like our typical handhelds, no big deal. But when you look at what it's already capable of and what you want the Switch to be able to do, and looking at all the games possible, it makes no sense to get rid of some of these features. And I'm not quite sure what they're going to do that. But that's the thing with the way the Switch is designed. It's hard to iterize upon it too much, because you need to keep those essentials. So maybe Nintendo's like, well, you don't have that many games that require this stuff, so maybe we can eat that hit and just have like, hey, watch out for this and be all right with it. I mean, that's the thing that might be possible, but again, summer seems too early for me. I don't know why. Well, for the Pro version, handheld, fine. That's no big deal. But Pro, this feels too early.
Yeah, I agree. It's like I said. I mean, given that most systems go through like a 5 to 6 year hardware cycle with a revision in the middle, the fact that we might already be coming up on that, it still feels a little soon.
In Europe and Japan, the new 3DS and new 3DS XL launched at the same time, so I guess this isn't too far from that. And even the PlayStation 4 Pro and PlayStation 4 Slim weren't too far apart. So I guess, these two different systems at the same time isn't unprecedented. But I do see where you're coming from, Derek. It does feel like the lower cost system is more imminent. That's a market that no one's covering at the moment. No one's covering that 3DS spot. Not even the 3DS, really, because the 3DS is kind of out the door at the moment. Mm-hmm. Whereas that more high-end spot, that is very well covered. So many systems are covering that spot. So yeah, to me, that doesn't seem like something that we need just yet.
Yeah. So what big thing could the Pro version add that would convince you guys that, hey, maybe I should pick this up?
I think the best thing you could do is replace the current Switch. When I think of this Pro unit, I'm basically thinking what we have now, but without the bezel. I'm thinking a different, like the Tegra X2. So it's more efficient, get like better battery life, better performance, and just generally what we have now, but a bit better.
Yeah, I do agree on the screen. Like, capitalize on that, because the screen on the current Switch model is, frankly, it's gorgeous, and that's not something that Nintendo has really done before. They are usually, they stick to lower res screens for their handheld devices, and the Switch is the first gaming system that Nintendo's ever released that feels truly sleek to me, like a cool piece of tech at the same time. So I say capitalize on that and make the sleekness of the current model even sleeker. So that lines up with what you said, John, about, give it no bezel, and not like a slightly nicer screen, and basically everything else you said. Upgrade to the Tegra X2. One other thing I'd like to see is greater connectivity, in the sense like actual ports. Because, if you play Smash, you're using 2 of those USB ports, well, both USB ports on the front, if you want to have rumble in the GameCube controllers, which isn't a big deal, but it's still kind of sloppy to have only 2 on the front of the unit, on the front of the dock, and have to use 2 just to have one accessory hooked up. So I would like to see them maybe double that to 4 USB ports all on the front, so you don't have to go into the back and fish for it. And maybe even a USB port on the unit itself, but that's probably less necessary. But it would be nice to see the Switch dock get a little more robust in terms of, connecting things to it more easily.
Mm-hmm.
For a moment, I thought you were going to say like integrated GameCube controllers, and I was like, sure, like
let's just add
GameCube ports on the console.
Yeah, why not?
Let's just add GameCube ports to everything from now on. Yeah,
perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think all I can really imagine is maybe a slightly secret design, updating a few aspects so it's a little bit more with the times, and that's about it. I'm not expecting a huge boost, but maybe that'll be the case. Maybe it'll be kind of like the 3DS XL to the new 3DS XL, where it is just that little bit more powerful and able to run certain games better. So maybe if you get this, you'll be able to actually run Doom on Switch at 60 FPS. Stuff like that.
Right. Something I was thinking of just now, I don't know how they could possibly actually do it, but what if they had some sort of like modular Joy-Con solution where, going in with the whole Pro moniker, if that's what it is called, where you can switch the buttons out for a D-pad or something like that. I don't know exactly how that would work, but that seems to be one of the most often requested features by enthusiast gamers. It's like, I want that D-pad. So maybe there's a way they can get something like that in there. I'm not sure, but I will say that aside from just the kickstand, which does need to be improved, it would be nice if maybe they created a way that you could adjust the screen's viewing angle when it's in tabletop mode, because one of the issues for me is that the viewing angle is currently too flat, so it's kind of hard to play it naturally in tabletop mode, in my opinion. So that would be kind of cool if they could add something like that.
I do feel like just having a bigger screen will improve tabletop mode, because in a lot of games you can just barely see what's going on, and I guess if you get rid of the bezel, you're getting a good extra inch or two on there. So that would just naturally help with that. I guess one aspect we haven't really considered is what if the Pro console is a stationary console that doesn't switch? Personally, I don't think that's what it's going to be, because I think the Switch relies too much on being able to switch. And we have Labo VR coming out next month, and if this system is coming out in maybe another 4 months from now, it's going to be very jarring to have this major piece of software that just isn't compatible with it. So yeah, what I'm kind of picturing is basically just the current Switch, but with less bezel. But I suppose there is a possibility it could just be a console.
Yeah, although I agree with you completely, John. Like, the Switch needs to be able to switch. That's why it's called the Switch. So I just feel like that would be a huge gamble for Nintendo to go back to a dedicated console, because that's what the other two already do. And Nintendo excels at doing their own thing, and the Switch is proof of that. It's done so well for them. So I think they got to stick with that concept, and I feel like it still has to be portable. And again, it's weird to think, is I agree as well that it seems like it would just be the current Switch, but slightly nicer looking. But again, the Wall Street Journal report says apparently it's going to look quite different. So I still don't know what that means, but yeah, it's strange to imagine it.
I am with you though. A Switch that can't switch is very uninteresting.
Yeah, exactly.
The point of the Switch is that it's a hybrid system, and when you get rid of that, it's just a less powerful console, which isn't interesting to your average consumer.
No, I completely agree. There would be no reason for me to upgrade to just a more powerful Switch that can't switch. Handheld has its own values, that there's no doubt about that, especially for kids. A Pro version, I think even hardcore gamers love the aspect of that, of being able to take it on the go. That is the major selling point of it. So Nintendo must be doing something else with it, and I'm not sure what it would be if they're changing the way it looks. I honestly don't know. So maybe they'll go for the dual screen or something like that, or maybe you can fold it in some way. Is there folding screens now? I have no idea. I don't keep up with tech.
I think so.
But
I think so. Actually, maybe.
Here's a question though. We're saying they won't do a Switch that can't switch, but can this cheaper version switch?
That's a good. I would think that maybe the cheaper version, if anything, if it can't switch, it might just be handheld only, because the report also mentions that the budget model is specifically meant to be a spiritual successor to the 3DS line. So in that case, I could see it being handheld only and maybe forgoing TV connectivity at all.
Is there anything that's stopping it from being able to connect to a dock though? Because the Switch charges through USB-C, which is exactly the same connector it uses to connect to a dock. So maybe they'll even take an opportunity to sell you a dock separately if you want to switch it.
That's true as well.
It's entirely possible to have a Switch mini dock or something like that.
Yeah.
Because I can see if the Joy-Cons are part of the system itself, and you can't remove them, well, it's going to be too small for it to go in a dock, and the buttons or the analog sticks will get in the way. So you need that smaller dock. Only, $60 rather than 90.
I guess they could also do like a Joy-Con and dock bundle, because if you have your handheld only system docks, you can't just rip off the controllers and play with those. So you're going to need another controller for that.
That's true.
Yeah, and one natural potential price cutting step they could take that would kind of naturally get around that is USB-C is still a fairly new format, and I don't know if it's actually more expensive to get one of those ports in there as opposed to an older USB port, but they could just get around that issue by saying, hey, the cheaper model has USB 2.0 and it's a different connector, and you can't use that with the current Switch docks.
I don't think that's going to be the solution, to be honest, but
probably not. And I don't know enough about if that even cuts costs or not. I have no idea.
Exactly. Oh, goodness. Well, do you guys have any other thoughts about the possibilities of this? Do we have any doubt? I guess the final thing would be, do we actually think these are both coming out in 2019?
I think it's hard to doubt the Wall Street Journal. They are basically as legit as it gets. And I have seen some comments saying they said the same thing last year, but they also specified 2019 last year, and one of their reports said there wouldn't be hardware revisions in 2018. So they haven't misreported anything, it's just been a long time coming. So I do think these are happening, and I do think they're necessary. But yeah, as Derek said earlier, I'm not sure if the Pro version is necessary yet. And it is interesting they're doing them at the same time, because I guess they're just giving people more choices. And I suppose it's also good to distance themselves from any hardware vulnerabilities. Because I think they fixed that in the current Switch, but I suppose someone could still go out and buy an older Switch which has that security vulnerability, which means it can be hacked. So I suppose it's just good to get away from that whole thing.
That's true. Do you guys think there's a chance that perhaps they're trying to future-proof the Switch against any potential impending PlayStation 5 or next Xbox announcements? Because we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close to those announcements. So could this be a way that they're kind of future-proofing against that?
I would not be surprised. Maybe not full future-proofing, but definitely get them a little bit closer so they can keep up.
I suppose on that thread, though, do you think that there's going to be any exclusive games to the Pro version? Because if they have more, hardware power, they can maybe make a game that matches, well, not matches, but competes with more powerful hardware. Because they kind of tried that on the new 3DS with Xenoblade, but that game didn't seem to sell that well. So whether there's precedence for that, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think if we're going to see that, we're going to get it more in the vein of Majora's Mask or something like that, where it runs better. There's obvious advantages to playing it on the Pro version or the better version, but you don't necessarily need it. And I think that's the way you want to do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking shorter load times, potentially more stable frame rates in certain games that support both Switches, in terms of a power differential. So I'm thinking stuff like that. But agreed, because the new 3DS specific games didn't really seem to take off, I doubt they would segment their library like that.
Right, and it is interesting that a lot of Switch games are dynamic already. Breath of the Wild switches between, I think it's 720p and 900p. Right. Same for Odyssey. So I guess if you do a Pro version, the game would just stabilize at the top resolution rather than fluctuating like the current one does. So it's kind of I guess there's not really much need to patch these games because they're already just going back and forth between these resolutions anyway.
Alright, well, I think that covers it for our Switch revision discussion, so thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, be sure to like us on Facebook and Twitter at GameXplain, and of course make sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more on the Switch and other things gaming as well. Until next time, bye!